this is Governor Bobber. I like good day, doctors.
George Allen here. Good day, doctors.
Good Friday, everyone. Happy New Year's, everyone. It's 2022. Cannot believe it. We made it. We're 2022. It's 7 days old. I've been pretty much on track with my resolution, one of not touching my iPhone after 8 p.m. Haven't done it yet. And I did that because, one, I was finding that, my hands were getting tired from holding the phone up, and so on. But
see, Dwight, that's easy for me because I'm trying to get to bed by 8 o'clock.
Well, Dwight, you probably have one of the. Do you have the newest iPhone 13, or?
Yeah, it's in the box. Actually, I needed to take it out and set it up. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I think the phones keep on getting heavier too, so I don't know if it's all just.
Well, I mean, the 12 is pretty heavy in its own right too.
Yeah.
And
I got a 12 last year, and I thought, okay, but for whatever reason, the battery life on that's at like 80-something%. I'm like, after only 1 year, and those AT&T is basically saying you can get a new phone. Also I paid off my phone from last year, and the 13 just arrived. Well, 13 Pro, I decided for that.
Oh, nice.
Young had 11, and I gave her a 13. So I'm like, yeah, why not? If AT&T is basically saying trade in your phone, and not, only thing I paid because I was going from the 12 to the 13 Pro was like $15 in sales tax and paid off the balance of my phone. I'm like, seems like a deal to me.
And you know what I don't like is that they won't let us pay. If you do the trading deal, they stick you with that monthly pay stuff. They don't let you just pay off the phone. They take the $1,000 and pay off the $800 or whatever it is. $1,500, I think, is the price of the phone, but let you pay that off. I don't know. It's not that charging you interest. I don't know why AT&T cares, or Verizon, or for that matter.
I think it's just to incentivize you to stay with the program.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's part of it, but I don't know. I mean, I think if I called them up and said, I want to pay off, we've got other phones on the plan with the kids. If I want to pay those off, I don't think AT&T, is necessarily going to say you can't pay off the phone. I mean, because they're subsidizing the phone anyway. I mean, they say, get your money now versus later. And I'm actually going to tell my boys and say, look, we'll pay off your phones. You can get a new phone. It might not be about how many more years they're going to continue to run that kind of program. I mean, we'll have a 14 out, by September next year or this year, and so, it'll. I'm thinking like, shoot, they keep running that deal. I'm just going to keep upgrading the stinking phone.
This is my first iPhone, the 4. And this is the iPhone. Look at it.
My iPhone was the iPhone 2 with a curved back.
Yeah, that's right. They did have the. I hear the next iPhone, the 14, is going to be kind of like that.
No, I'm sure not.
And then you have my LG phone. By the way, LG is out of the phone business. This might become a collector's item one day.
Where's your BlackBerry?
Actually, I never had a BlackBerry. I had a Palm Pilot. And that was because when I was working at a .com, everybody had a Palm Pilot. So that's the only reason I bought a Palm Pilot. It was all out of peer pressure. I bought a Palm Pilot 5X. And the coolest
just a little bit before their time. I mean, think about Apple and the Newton, and everything like that. Where we are today is like, you could say we're now into the ancestors of those things, but those things are initially kind of flopped after a while.
There's one feature I like about Palm Pilot that I wish Apple would incorporate is the beaming feature where it could beam a contact to somebody. You could do that with the Palm Pilot. You could beam stuff.
Yeah, but I think Bluetooth is a little better than infrared when it comes to.
Yeah, it is. But enough about technology.
You just like beaming things like Star Trek, right?
Yes, that's exactly.
Beam me
That's
up, Scotty.
that's actually. Oh, when I was working at the .com. It was they were right there at Metro Center and the old Epic Grill building, and I'd pass a Franklin Covey store back when Franklin Covey still had stores. Are they even around anymore?
So they're actually doing very well, believe it or not.
Really?
They just moved digital. That's all.
They used to have this. They had a really good deal on a Palm Pilot. It was like around, I want to say, it was in the springtime. They had a really good deal. You get a 5X, and you got some Franklin Covey calendar and a bunch of other stuff, with it. For about, I think it was about. It may have only been like $300 at the time, which back then, $300 was a serious amount of money. Well, not really, but when you're only making, say, $110 a year, 300 is not something you. It's one of those things where you miss it, but you can afford to do it.
You said when you're only making $110 a year.
Yeah,
I know. Did you just say that?
The old days where we had to deal with bills and such.
By the way, let me tell you the 110 back then. I found this is kind of funny. This might put me in the out of touch region, but I tell you, 110 for the .com for the work I was doing, I was overpaid. I should not have been making more than say 85, 90,000 is what I should have been making, if even that much. Because what I was doing was really not that complicated or anything like that. But it was a .com. How do you spend so many millions and millions of dollars? That's how you do it. You overpay everybody there, including myself. And we all had nice offices. We were at the old Epic Grill building, great place. A lot of nice stuff. Now, then the Borders moved in, and then the Borders went out. But it was good times, the .com days.
When I did a website design for my first company, the first company after working at a computer repair place, I was making $14 an hour. So that gives you some perspective of the good old days.
Hey, when I was working for Don, I was making $25,000 a year when I was working for Don.
And that was a lot of money.
And that was actually, what is it? Keith Morris Keith said, he goes, "Hey, you're actually with the higher echelon of the pay scale."
Yeah. You don't get, well, at least in my realm of the nonprofits thing.
That's all. That's a lot of.
Yeah, we couldn't spend the money like Heritage did.
Oh, Heritage, yeah. I mean, even back then, though, I remember when I went over to Free Congress, I was like tickled pink when I was offered like $44,000 a year to work over at Free Congress Foundation, and but nowadays a lot of these nonprofit places pay pretty well. I mean, Heritage, you can be making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, at Heritage, Leadership Institute, all these places, but then again.
I don't think my father ever paid himself more than about 60. So you always had to use that as kind of the ceiling of where you could go and then go from there. And so, he took very little money out of a nonprofit compared to, Morton Blackwell, Grover, Ed Fulner, all these guys making good money.
Yeah. I mean, and also, I think one of the. Then again, I bet if you adjust for inflation, Biden inflation, it's probably people are probably making about $25,000 a year. This is what I was making 25 years ago, 30 years ago, almost when I was working for you, 30 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, it was in the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, 96 to 97.
Well, minimum wage back then was $6.15 an hour. So.
Yeah. For whatever that's worth.
Well, since I brought it up, let's talk a little bit about January 6th, which a wiser person than myself referred it to as the 4th of July for Democrats. Look, let me say, I'm not, what happened last year on January 6th was a bad thing, but these people turned it into cheap political theatrics. They had a woman, I was watching channel surfing on PBS. Christiana Amanpour evidently has a show on PBS. And she had some woman with purple hair talking about how terrified she was. And it took me a minute to figure out that, oh, it's not because she saw herself in the mirror with all the purple hair that terrified her. But the way, I mean, so they've cheapened the whole thing. They went around blasting, President Trump. There's so much for the great unifier, Joe Biden. And got news for you. That was all attacked to distract people from the real crisis of about how the price of gas has almost doubled, some places more than doubled, how inflation is running rampant, supply chains. I went to the grocery store Thursday, Don. There were signs, we haven't had our deliveries yet. We'll come back Friday. It's like, really? It's like some of our stores are starting to look like the 1980s Soviet era supermarkets, where there's like one loaf of bread there.
Well, I just got an email from Harris Teeter because I rarely go there, but I'm a part of their EVIP club, their membership club, and they put out an announcement that except for a handful of stores, and I think there are maybe 15 stores on the list, and this is North Carolina, Baltimore, and places like this where they have the HTs. They're actually going to start closing their stores at 9 p.m. stocking and things like that because there's a struggling with so many issues between staffing and having merchandise that they're going to close an hour or two earlier than they normally would, and they'll try to solve that. That's just once again just kind of a microcosm of what the heck is going on here. But you mentioned, as we talk about January 6th, and I think it deserves something to be talked about. And I hate talking about January 6th in a lot of ways, only because I wake up yesterday and what do I see is I start seeing a whole flood of stuff from from kind of the conservative right wing people, with changing their profile picture to Ashley Babbitt and talking about all the other things. I'm like, I'm sorry. Look, I think it's a terrible thing that Ashley Babbitt lost her life in this, but she was part of this crowd. She was in a place she shouldn't have been to begin with, and she has got to take them for this, rather than putting it all on some Capitol Hill policeman who kind of went rogue or whatever and then shot this innocent woman. It's like, look, she was in the Capitol building with those other nuts.
Exactly. And as I said last year when this happened, we did our show last year too, the week of January 6th. And I mentioned this last year, if any liberals are listening, you may want to cover your ears. I'm about to say something that you may not like, shocker. But it is nice to see the Democrats come around to the policy of Richard M. Nixon on dealing with rioters. Richard Nixon, he restored order at Kent State, went there. President Reagan restored order at Berkeley when he was governor. Nixon restored order at Kent State, and all the lefties were outraged at how dare they shoot these protests. Maybe if President Trump, just maybe, it's nice to see the Democrats coming around to Nixon era policies. They've already agreed on wiretappings and bugging their political opponents' offices. They already did that, with the FISA courts.
Yeah, and I'm not, and I'm not in the camp that says, says that, Trump instigated the whole thing. He could have done something to diffuse the situation, but the Capitol Hill police were also ill prepared. Those people who did the damage and caused the riots and everything, they had been planning on it. They were instigators. They were going to plan on this. I don't think it really would have mattered. If President Trump had said, "Don't go and do anything like whatever. Don't go and you can go ahead and peacefully demonstrate about this, but don't do anything beyond that." I don't think that they would have listened anyway. I think they were loaded.
We're the party of law and order. Okay, we're the party of law and order. And here's the thing: they can no more hold President Trump liable for the rioters than we can of Hillary Clinton of the rioters during the inauguration, where they broke windows of businesses that had nothing to do with President Trump and burned the limo, or the riot. Can we blame? I think. And where is the outrage where you have these mostly, the summer of 2020 was filled with mostly peaceable protesters. Reminds me of Baghdad Bob. No Americans have made it to Baghdad. And then you see these tanks coming down and taking down the Iraqi flags in the background. That is what these guys, they've turned into amalgamation of Baghdad Bob, is what they've done. They deny. See, at least with us Republicans, we can call out our scoundrels and say, this was wrong. Democrats are still not capable of saying the rioters, the smash and grab looters is wrong. They have yet to condemn that.
Yeah, but
I'll say this too, because it's definitely one of those issues that definitely provides heat on both sides. So I would say that there are still elements to investigate about the January 6th incident, whether you call it insurrection or if we call it a protest or riot, whatever. I think that there is still stuff that's being uncovered. That's like saying, we should give up investigating Benghazi because we know everything we know about that. It's
we
like
did. Unfortunately, we already did.
But I'm saying there may be some things that we may never fully realize, and if there isn't the opportunity to uncover more about the, what happened, what instigated, just to Don's point, I mean, people, I think everyone knew this was going to be an issue. You have that many people there, and having both the district police and the National Guard and all the normal staff there, it's like, where were everyone? It's like they were, artificially understaffed. And that's a question because that was totally atypical of the normal, MO. And then, of course, there's questions about were they instigated or such, which, is probably less of a concern. But if there were people that could have worked to either quell or deal with the situation but chose not to, I think that there stands to be a little bit of responsibility on that regard too, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I think back to his original point or comment that he made too about kind of as a distraction for some other things. I mean, Biden probably he was probably going to have to give some kind of a speech no matter what. I mean, everybody's made such a big deal of it, particularly Democrats in the media, about this being such a seminal moment in our history and tying it into other big events. But on the other hand, he didn't necessarily there bring in Trump because just like the investigative committee that's working on this is very political. The only thing that even remotely works for the Democrats sometimes is bad mouthing Trump. Okay, not to say that Trump doesn't deserve some bad mouthing from time to time, but that they keep trying to bring him up because they are kind of devoid of issues. I mean, and they do have problems. I mean, Biden's poll numbers continue to sink. I mean, his disapproval rate. I mean, CNBC just had a poll this past week, and his disapproval ratings, are now at like 60%, and they're in that range on COVID and the economy. These are not good signs for the Democrats in an election year. I mean, they've got the House of Representatives coming up for re-election. They've had 25 Democrats and 12 Republicans announce their retirement from Congress, either completely retiring from politics or they're going to run for another office. But it puts the Democrats in a little bit of a hole. Even if some of them are safe seats, there are going to probably wind up being some competitive seats as a result of this. And Republicans are expecting some changes that will go their way. The question is that how much of a majority in a lot of people's minds will the Republicans have after November? Will it be big or will it be narrow? I mean, but this is if you're a Democrat running. I mean, with Biden, with inflation running the way it is, jobs numbers are kind of soft. We've got lots of jobs available, but people have resigned and quit. They don't want, they decided to move on and do different things. Long term for the economy, that's not a good sign either. They've got a lot of problems that they can't resolve. So Trump seems to be the perfect foil. And yet you look across the river in Virginia, Terry McAuliffe tried to nationalize Virginia by using Donald Trump, and that fell on its face. So I think the Democrats are making a lot of mistakes here by kind of keep trying to reel Donald Trump or trying to make him an issue where, Donald Trump still has an amazing amount of influence, within the Republican Party, in terms of endorsing people and getting people to run for office and even challenging some other incumbent Republicans and things like that. But for Democrats to use him as a weapon, as kind of the boogeyman, as to why you need to vote for a Democrat, it's like, no, I don't think that works. I mean, the Democrat, voters want to know, it's like, what are you doing for me, and how are you going to solve this problem? I don't have enough money on the table here to pay for food. If food continues to skyrocket, but I can't keep up with this, and I can't find stuff that I need. They haven't fixed it. I mean, where is that big solution of Joe Biden? What was the solution to supply chain? It was to force the ports to open 24/7. Well, that wasn't, on the surface, that sounds like it's going to fix the problem. The reality is that everybody else who knew anything realized it's like, no, that's not the problem. The ports can stay open, but they don't have the truck drivers, they don't have the port workers. There's a multiple number of things that they did. So what's he trying to do? Plus, he wanted an investigation of the oil companies when gas prices went high. It's like, really, seriously?
He still thinks Dick Cheney and George W. Bush are raising the prices of gas.
Well, he's doing the same thing for meat.
Yes.
He must have an investigation of the meat processors. It's like, really? I mean, this is not the problem.
Right. So let me say a little bit about this, because I mean, again, I think everyone, just like as before, there's a lot of issues on both sides, and as much as I didn't always agree with all of Trump's policy, at least he represented a party. I'll call him like a blue collar president, in the sense that he at least represented a certain demographic. I can't figure out what demographic Joe Biden is representing, because he doesn't really have any particular policy which really benefits any particular demographic, whether it be the working people or the industry leaders or anything. There's really nothing that he's done that I can see that has benefited any sector of our economy. And to your point, Don, I mean, we have infrastructure problems, and instead of dealing with the foundational issues, ensuring that we have good supply chain, strengthen our supply chain, he's investigating all of the the higher up issues of like why people are profiteering, during a COVID pandemic. And yes, these are things, and I'm not saying that the oil companies or JBS or other meatpacking industries are blameless. I mean, you can look at the profits and they're off the charts, but again, that's a separate issue. That's part of.
Everyone's going to make a profit,
But again, that's a separate issue. We have other fundamental supply chain problems about, like Don said, if you keep the ports open, but if you don't have the truckers, if you don't have the ships coming in, if you have other issues, you're going to have these issues, a supply chain problem. And we have, again, I think people were expecting the Biden administration to have a better, we all expected this COVID to be around for a while. I think we expected to have, a policy from the Biden administration saying, during this pandemic, this is how we're going to maintain our infrastructure safely and securely. But I've not seen anything from that. I'm not seeing how anything has been said where we can continue to work in a safe environment. I'm not, you look at like Maryland. Maryland just declared another state of emergency where, where hospitals are now re-encumbered, and we don't have enough testing centers. And you try to get tested, and it's like you can't. There's not enough testing centers now. These are issues that are, I would have figured would have been solved at this point. But we see no national mandates or other programs to actually, support these this issue. So again, that's the issue I have. It's not so much that, I know gas is more expensive now and other things are more expensive, and I can deal with those, the inflation of that, because again, sometimes that is just pandemic related. But the things I can't really excuse him for is like, again, I can't get tested. We still have issues with, like I said, supply chains. These are things that he has control over, and are not better.
Yeah, I mean,
and
go ahead.
My point is to see Joe Biden. I tell you what his core constituency is: the Looney Tune wacko fringe left, the AOCs, the Squad. That's his base. Those are the people he fears them more than he fears the American people. Frankly,
I'm going to say I disagree with him. That's his base. I do think what's happened here is that he has caved to them. There's a lot of pressure from that AOC group that has basically said, this is the agenda we want. Because Joe Biden, has has basically been known as kind of the worker guy, right? The blue collar guy,
Lunch Bucket Joe, right?
right? But this administration, rather than being more towards the center, on the Democrat scale, has shifted. The policies that they have introduced have been to the left, have been to the far left, and that's a huge mistake on his part to go ahead. He's let himself being co-opted by that, and that's leading to disaster. I mean, their legislative agenda right now is pretty much in shambles because Build Back Better is loaded with left-wing green energy, all those things that the left wants. And thanks to Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, they're saying no. We can't do that. I mean, this makes
now's not the time. I mean, I'm not saying that green energy is not a good thing to pursue, but again, to your point, I mean, you're all aware, Dwight and Don, about how Virginia and like DC has instituted the electric only leaf blowers for lawn maintenance and those kind of things. And these aren't necessarily bad programs, but to introduce them now, to force them in this issue is putting an extra encumbrance on people that are already struggling. So again, and I still, again, me personally, I still am upset with Biden for the Dakota pipeline debacle, where we were in the middle of this, and this wouldn't have changed, energy policy. We're not going to consume more or less gas because of this, but it would have helped reduce the dependence upon existing overburdened infrastructure. And instead of saying, well, let's continue it on and develop a sound energy policy where we incentivize alternative fuels, he said, nope, this is a Trump thing. We're just going to stop it mid program and just deal with the fallout. And then we're dealing with the fallout. Now we have increased gas prices when we can't deal with. We have no alternative sources for this stuff. So that's my issue again, is that some of the stuff he should have seen coming. And again, I'm not against green energy policies on paper, but the way you push them in the middle of a pandemic where people are already struggling.
Here's the thing. I think it's kind of like as many also on the right feel about gridlock and transportation issues, all above solutions. We're for all of the above solutions for energy independence. Okay, we're not against green energy. We're here's a little secret for everyone who loves those plug-in hybrids and those electric cars. You think you're so happy driving down the road, being very green. That electricity comes from a coal plant from not too far away from here.
Yeah.
And
I mean, Jeff, you talk about. I mean, I agree with you in general. You talk about kind of on this green energy stuff too. The one thing that I'm kind of curious about that I haven't read or heard anything about with this huge push to EVs is exactly how the people on the lower end of the economic scale are going to afford any kind of an EV. Right now, EVs are still pretty expensive. Even with a tax credit, they're expensive. And there are a lot of people who've got cars.
Why would you buy a used EV? Because the most expensive part of an EV is the battery. That's the thing that's costs the most and is the most consumable. A used EV, the first thing you have to do is replace a battery. That's going to cost you $15,000 to $20,000 for the battery just by itself. That's a ridiculous reinvestment expense when that's like, again, that's the majority of the cost of the car. So that's like we're buying a laptop where you have like the first thing you do is replace a battery. It's going to increase the cost of that.
Well, here's something else for you guys. Lexus is planning to go all EV, right? Kia has a few affordable EVs out there now or in the pipeline. And then you got Fisker they've got, a competitor. I guess it actually looks nice. I think it's called the Ocean. It's an SUV crossover. And it's roughly about $60,000, which isn't cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but it is about the same price as if you were to buy, say, a Chevy Tahoe or a fully loaded Ford Expedition, Lincoln Navigator. Well, Lincoln Navigators are $100,000.
Right. I think sometimes you live a little bit, in a different world than some of the people. People that get a car, like
I agree with you, Jeff. I tell you.
Yeah.
Hey, my Yukon is the first new car I bought in probably over 15 years.
$10,000. So you can get like a $10,000 car in this day and age. It's going to be a no frills car, but you can get a car for 10,000. But if you talk about an EV where the battery pack costs 15,000, there's no way. It's like trying to get a no frills car that has like all the bells and whistles. I mean, it's you can get like manual windows. You can get a stick shift. On an EV, there's no such options. You can't downgrade the EV to use like your own batteries or something. There's a minimum threshold for an EV that you just can't get below.
Lexus is going to have a EV for starting around $35,000, which that's about the average price of a new car now? I mean, the used cars, what, $30,000 average price?
It depends again where you're looking for. I mean, if you're talking about like the working class people, I mean, a lot of them are still looking at like the Toyotas and the Hyundais and the other lower end cars that are not necessarily like even no frills, but they're just very economically minded. They don't have like the backup cameras. They don't have all of the fancy automatic drive-by-wire cruise control that some of the other cars have. So again, I think people out of college or people that are working class just want a around the town car that's not going to cost them too much. And $35,000.
The Nissan Leaf is the car for them.
What was 25,000, 35,000 is not bad for most like white collar workers, but if you're talking about the working class, you're talking even below that. So most manufacturers have a kind of the no frills car like the Chevy Cruze or the Nissan Leaf is probably the cheapest EV, but beyond that there are other.
This is the Kia EV6. It's a very nice looking car.
I mean, I think they're EVs. I mean, they look pretty cool, but they are so expensive. I mean, and back to what Jeff was saying is kind of what I've been thinking about. It's just that even if you're say the middle class family, but then you've got a couple of kids in college or whatever, you're not going to want to spend $30,000.
No, absolutely not.
To have a car. You're going to be. A lot of people I know will be looking for. They're hoping to get a car for say $10,000 or less, and it can be a beater as long as it's good enough to get the kid around and back home and back and forth. Past a few years, they figure that's worth it. The problem, as you state, Jeff, is that the EVs, you can't get them like that because of the battery issue and things like that. Plus, we've got one of the problems right now. This huge push to EVs, they don't even have the capacity to make enough batteries for all the EVs that they're claiming to do. And the whole thing about Lexus, Dwight, this really pains me because that's all our family has been buying, used for the last several years are Lexus. And we're thinking like, holy cow, does this mean we should probably buy another Lexus as soon as we can find one and just kind of tuck it away?
Well, actually, let me give you a recommendation, Don. The Ford Explorer. I had one for about a week when I was in Florida not too long ago. I enjoy it. I'm skeptical of Ford, but in a Ford, it was actually nice. It rode well, got good gas mileage. It was a sport model, and basically, it's roughly about you can get a new one out the door, roughly about $30,000 to $35,000, but you can probably get a nice used one for about in the 20s. Again, I might be out of touch. A nice used one for 20,000, but my point is. Maybe people should start looking at buying American again, American cars that are made in Detroit, in Michigan. Ford Explorers are made in Michigan.
I think to a certain extent, we'll have a clearer picture once we get past the supply chain, really, I think, distorting the market on cars. Because, look, I mean, Toyota outsold GM. GM has been since like 1930, right? But they were constrained because of chips. Toyota actually had their chip supply in order, so they could. So they managed to make 114,000 more cars, sold 114,000 more cars here in the U.S., and so they topped GM. Now that will probably, if things come back to normal, probably will smooth out. But I think it also shows that Toyota has made a lot of inroads, nevertheless, on GM. But
how many of those were fleet sales, by the way? I mean, I know years ago, Ford Taurus, the reason it was number one for so many years, Ford gave, I think, Hertz and Avis a sweetheart deal on buying a whole bunch of Ford Tauruses for their fleet sales, thereby them getting,
Yeah,
you know,
there was no doubt that fleet sales to rental car companies pumped it up. But rental car, look, Hertz and Avis and those guys, they're having a hard time finding enough cars. They're keeping cars longer, and they're actually buying used cars to put on their
mhm.
lots. So because they cannot get the new cars from the big three, you
Yeah.
know, they can't get them anymore. So it's just like this, you know, this EV by these car manufacturers. It's just that, you know, they're all falling into line. They think, oh, we have to be very green, very eco-conscious, and we got to do this.
Mhm.
Uh, and that whole thing where Biden administration is also trying to give the labor unions a boost by saying, if you buy an EV from a company, when a car company that's organized, you get like a
Mhm.
$15,000 tax credit. But if you buy it from the non-union shop, you only get like a $7,500 credit. It's like, come on! It's like this is,
This is the future of General Motors, guys. The Cadillac, and this is basically a
so,
re. They'll definitely have a Chevrolet and a Buick and a GMC version of this car, but this is the future of GM. This is what's going to turn things around for GM. I think, although it's not your father's Cadillac, the nice land yachts, Uh, but I think EVs. But here's the thing: the real future is not electric vehicles. Hydrogen fuel cells. That is the future.
you're back to
We
that again.
really need. We really need to, because here, look, hydrogen fuel cells are the greenest of all can be. The byproduct is water. It's cheap, and if you have, I think you could make enough modifications where you might be able to use. Oh, Jeff, help me here. What was those machines that we had in physics class that separated the
Like
oxygen?
fuel cells or the
No, no.
electrolysis.
Remember, we had the thing that separated the
Well,
hydrogen from the oxygen, and then you
that's
could bring them together.
electrolysis.
Yeah,
And then
incorporates.
fuel cells are the ones that we combine it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, okay, so yeah, I mean, hydrogen in theory is a great product, but the fuel density is poor. The storage of hydrogen is problematic.
Mhm.
We don't have an infrastructure for hydrogen.
Oh, the Hindenburg was just bad. Was
But
pilot
again,
error.
my point is to Dwight, you're like, we should be allowing what technologies are available. I mean, there may be areas where hydrogen does make sense. I mean, you've seen like various metro authorities where they use natural gas for running
Mhm.
buses, but a lot of bus transit authorities have decided that actually electric buses make more sense from a maintenance standpoint, if nothing else, than for
Mhm.
anything else. So the people that have typically used diesel pushers are now switching to electric buses because they actually they have a better ROI. They cost less over the long term than the traditional buses. So again, I think we are stuck with electric. I think that is the better choice. The problem is, again, electric by its own, it is not necessarily cleaner than any other fuel. The
Mhm.
actual delivery of electricity is not uh, is carbon neutral, but the generation of electricity, obviously, we're talking about traditional coal
Yeah.
plants and
And you
you
know
know,
how we can make that kick up the green score is switch to nuclear power and
well,
use
of
nuclear
course, we
power
talked
to
about
go
this
to the
before.
homes, and
That
then there
there's
you go.
been
Enviros, you won't be using that dirty old coal. You'll be
right. Well,
using
we talked about
clean.
alternative and next gen, fission reactors. They are
Yeah.
on the horizon. We don't need to wait for either to figure out if fusion is viable. We have alternative technologies right
Hmm.
now, both in terms of better, more efficient
Uh,
traditional uranium fission
mhm.
reactors, as well as some potential next gen with thorium and other
Hmm.
fuels that actually can clean up existing. Because again, you get the people that are concerned about, well, what about the nuclear waste? Well, there are reactors that are designed to take the nuclear waste and reintegrate them into reactors and burn it in the process. So you're not left with any transuranium byproducts. And this is kind of not mentioned much too, but a lot of nuclear medicine requires isotopes of iodine and other things that are only produced in nuclear reactors. And we have a diminishing supply of those, so that there are certain things that the medical industry needs desperately that are
Hmm.
only produced by nuclear reactors. And we look at like NASA, the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2
Hmm.
are, and even I think some of the Mars landers were powered by a plutonium thermoelectric cell. Basically, the plutonium has a long half-life and it generates a lot of heat, but it's very long lasting. So the reason that Voyager still lasts is because their plutonium cell is still producing heat, which is still producing electricity. It's not much, but it's still working. I mean, after how many years now?
Hmm.
So, and again, you can't get those materials except by fission reactors. So there are practical reasons for it besides all the concerns that people have, but for the, the potential like Fukushima, issue. I mean, those are preventable issues, and those are things that are just, we need to
By the
plan.
way, I just got some breaking news. This car right here has been endorsed by Greta Thunberg. It's a wind-powered car.
So anyway, I mean, we can talk about that some other time. But the point is that that's the stuff that I champion, because there are solutions to this, but we have to have a strong administration which actually pushes them. And I was really hoping that Biden was going to be pushing on, if he's going to go alternative energy, fine, let's push on it, but let's make some sensible policies. But we've not seen anything yet. It's all about, well, coal bad, wind and solar good kind of thing. And there are, you talk about the chip shortage. I mean, we're going to have supply chain issues too if we try to go all solar, all wind. Those require rare earths. Those require special
Hey Jeff, a wind powered car,
we don't have
chips
access to
needed.
except through China. So I mean, we're not going to get in a better position as a nation even if we went all solar and wind. It's not going to help us. So again, these sound good on paper, but in practice, they tie our hands and they make us more beholden to infrastructure which we don't have control over.
But Jeff, a lot of this stuff is all about making people feel better about themselves, and that's what it is. People, oh look, it's like, remember when the Toyota Priuses came out? Oh, everybody wanted to buy. There were other hybrids they could have bought, but everybody wanted to buy the Prius. You know why? Because they wanted to feel good about this. And they wanted people to put, oh look, that guy loves the planet. This guy's just doing lip service by slapping a "I love the Earth" sticker on my Lincoln Continental. And that's the whole thing. People feel very, very. It's like virtue signaling, and that's what it is with EVs. But they don't seem to understand that a Toyota Prius's carbon footprint is larger than my GMC Yukon. Take that, liberals.
Well, again, I let consumers make the choices they want to make. Whether it comes to eating meat, not eating meat, getting an SUV, or a smart car or whatever. I mean, let people make their own choices. I mean, if you make them feel like their choices matter, that's fine. People who buy Priuses, certainly have the reasons for doing it, whether it's economy or feeling they're serving the planet. I'm not going to, question their motives, because obviously, if somebody wants to, save the planet and they feel like, the Prius is the way to do it, that's not fault of them. That's the fault of the companies for advertising it that it's better when it's really not. Just like how Apple says, well, the reason we force people to buy new iPhones is because we're helping we're making this a green planet. We're forcing people to recycle their old equipment. I'm like, no, that's not an argument.
Hey, hold on one second. Funny you should mention recycling. These just happen to be here, so let me share this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got more.
Right.
But,
so again,
it's
a paper argument, but the thing is, companies like to use it because it sounds good. But regardless, I mean, again, that's one side of the coin. We talk about like national infrastructure, and think about the supply chains. I mean, we are heavily reliant upon our trucking infrastructure, the truckers themselves, the interstates, the whole shipping industry. I mean, we rely upon this as like a core aspect of our transportation. I mean, we have to have this because this is how we get our products, our cars, our fuel and energy. Everything is based upon, the shipping industry. And, there are issues with that. Like I said, I mentioned again to Don, like you said, you can keep ports open, but if there aren't people to deliver items, they're not going to go anywhere. And these are things that are not complicated concepts. But again, if you want to help the economy, then start from the basics. So say, here are infrastructure that our country is reliant upon, for good or ill, whatever. Let's focus on that. Make sure that the people that are in charge of delivering the infrastructure have the support that they need, both from a cybersecurity standpoint, that they are able to defend against cyber attacks, as well as infrastructure deficiencies, and there's a lot of things that are involved here. But I would focus on that, not focus on these green energy programs that, well, we needed to plant a wind farm in eastern Nebraska because there's great energy potential there, even though it's nowhere close to the national power grid, and it's going to cost millions of.
And everybody knows that Oklahoma is where you want to build a wind farm because that's where the wind comes whipping down the plains.
But again, we build these farms is not necessarily
Yeah.
the best area. I mean, again, you have these transmission losses too that you say, okay, well, here's a great place to build a energy farm. Well, yeah, it may be, but then you have to have the power lines that go there. Plus, you've got all the energy losses. Plus, you got to have the batteries to to back up the energy when it's not in use. Because again, peak power usage doesn't also correspond when you're generating the energy. So there are so many issues with that it's just like, let's not focus on that. Let's get the better known green energy solutions like nuclear back in play so that we're not reliant upon coal and fusion, coal and green energy to supplant this, and we can actually start focusing more on, again, building the distribution infrastructure and supplying electricity to people that need it.
Well, here's the thing, Jeff. If we had actually did a steady move forwards towards nuclear power and weren't terrified by the nuclear waste and things like 3 Mile Island, which wasn't that bad, everyone. 3 Mile Island was not that bad. We'd be on the road to green energy and energy independence. We'd probably be there by now with nuclear power. We wouldn't be needing so much coal. And if we would drill, and if we'd been drilling in Anwar and national park lands, all over, we'd be energy independent. We'd be We'd be exporting energy, and that's the other thing that people don't understand. You can freeze natural gas and export that. And there was actually a plant that they wanted to build in Sparrows Point, where the old Bethlehem Steel was in Baltimore City, a plant where you could liquefied natural gas and ships come in, you fill them up, then they can move that to, say, Europe. We can supply the Europeans with natural gas that way. But people were too timid and they were looking backwards, and oh my God, liquefy. What happens if there's an explosion? It's like everyone's
right. And of course, I mean, there are concerns, but the ultimate thing too is if people are concerned about the carbon footprint and say, okay, we're whether it is coal or gas or whatever, and say, okay, we need to have something which doesn't increase the CO2 in the atmosphere. Again, we're talk about the traditional nuclear reactors. Those things don't have a carbon footprint. And the next gen ones that run on like molten salts can actually run so hot that they can actually run a process which reclaims carbon from the atmosphere and creates like methane and such from the carbon dioxide in the air.
Yep.
So we can actually start decreasing our carbon footprint through this mechanism. But again, these are things that are known that can work, but we need to have a strong policy to develop them because, and I mentioned before about thorium. I mean, the Chinese government are fully behind this. They're developing it. The stuff that we had in the 60s at Oak Ridge National Laboratories, the stuff we showed works, and we basically abandoned. The Chinese are reinvesting in that, and I've seen nothing on our side that shows any interest. So my estimation is within 10 years, we're going to be buying, our next gen reactors from China with technology that we developed back in the 60s because we've done nothing with it. We'd be like, well, we've basically punted it. So.
And
you're talking about when you talk about this nuclear energy too. I mean, you mentioned Fukushima earlier. I mean, the accident in Fukushima spurred Angela Merkel in Germany to basically say we're going to decommission our nuclear power plants.
Right.
And the result is some of the best energy prices for consumers in Germany by doing that, by going away from nuclear energy, which we all know is an extremely cheap form of energy. So the EU,
Fukushima was a chemical reaction. What happened, what blew the top on the Fukushima reactor is the fact that when you had, the water, which, talked about the electrolysis in nuclear reactors, you've got basically the water decomposing into hydrogen and oxygen. You've got to have a recombiner, which puts it back into the water. Otherwise, you've got these gases. Well, that's what happened in Fukushima. Their backup generators, which were responsible for recombining the gases back in the water, were flooded, and so they weren't working. And so you had these gases, hydrogen and oxygen, building up ignited, blew the top. That was the explosion at Fukushima. It wasn't a nuclear explosion; it was a chemical explosion. But of course, it released all of the nuclear contaminants as part of that. But again, even that, as tragic as it was, could have been prevented if we had planned better and said, okay, well, again, we need to ensure that these have backup power that provide for these fail safes. But the old pressurized water reactors are not walkaway safe. They have to be maintained actively by safety mechanisms. There are newer technologies which are considered walkaway safe, meaning that if everything failed, you lost power, you lost control rods, everything failed, the system self shuts down. These are walkaway safe reactors, and they have, we can make those if we want to, but nobody wants to because they're so afraid of these potential, accidents with the old technology that we haven't developed, improved upon in 60 years. That nobody says, okay, well, all fusion is bad. That's like saying all of electricity is bad because part of how we generate electricity is bad. It just doesn't make sense.
So what I'm trying to say here is just that, so we know how green, environmentally conscious, Europe is. And so the EU has been hammering out this taxonomy issue, which deals with energy. And as they have been putting this together, what's happened is that they have the Greens even screaming at the top of their lungs. They're basically being forced to agree that nuclear energy is part of this plan for the future, because I mean they want wind, they want solar, but the nuclear forces, largely part thanks to France, which relies heavily on nuclear energy.
Yep.
The nuclear energy. They have been doing this, but this is actually, I think as long as the plan, I think it's like until the year 2040, nuclear energy is going to get kind of a semi blessing by the Greens in this plan, and some other things in there, but it's got a lot of the far left greenies in Europe upset with this, that the idea that that's in there, but yet it needs to be in there because it is safe and it's cheap, and it's something that they can deal with versus, it's a lot better than using coal for them from a carbon footprint plan, and then to include natural gas in this. So the Greens are having a real struggle with this, saying like, oh yeah, well, in order for us to survive and actually run the country and do this, we actually need these other sources of energy that we have been bashing for the last 20 years. So it's all coming to fruition. And yet we've got Joe Biden, and the Democrats, they look to Europe. I mean, they have been definitely influenced by the Greens in Europe as they have transplanted their policies here. It's like, just be aware of that. And then you have Merkel, who's now out of office, but she has also really kind of said, she's been a big supporter of Nord Stream 2, giving Germany their reliance on natural gas coming in through Russia.
Which gives them more leverage.
She's basically saying, it's okay. We're gonna be beholden to Russia for a lot of our energy. It's also showing the leftward tilt of Germany. I mean, her successor is not part of the conservative side of things.
Yeah, I know. Where's Helmut Kohl?
Well, I mean, it's tipping back to the old days, right?
I know. They need a Helmut Kohl.
Again, I think one of the telling things is like you look at China, what they're investing in. I mean, China is not really beholden to anyone economically when it comes to making a policy, and they're investing in nuclear because it makes sense. They've taken a look at it, and for them it makes sense. Like they're still obviously using a lot of traditional energy at this point, but they are investing in the future. But everyone else is like saying, well, we're so, we can't look at it because, of all the potential. And again, it's gotten such a bad rep because people just like to think about, like the Cold War. I think is what it is. It's shadows of the Cold War. People think that, that anything that supports nuclear at all is like, Russia era, like, arms races, that if you build a nuclear plant, then of course you're going to be having enriched uranium for, warheads. And, we've so feared everyone about with like Iran and their nuclear program that they can potentially develop a nuclear arsenal by having reactors and stuff, that they don't realize that there are alternative technologies which you cannot, for example, in some nuclear things like a thorium-based reactor. You cannot create any kind of weapons-grade material from that kind of process. It's just not possible. You can't make certain elements from that process because you're starting with a different source. You're starting with basically uranium-233 as opposed to uranium-235, which has a totally different decay chain. It doesn't go to plutonium ever. It has a separate decay cycle, which again, if you're concerned about nuclear from a proliferation standpoint, then again there are solutions. It's just that people need to take a real strong look at this and figure out what they want to do, what the true energy policy is. And I think, to you guys' point, a lot of it is just trying to look good on behalf of the people that are hand waving about how bad things are. Well, yes, things are bad, and I think that I'm one of the people who believe that we have made a significant impact in our climate by all the CO2 we've emitted. But I'm not going to be like, well, energy, we can't use energy anymore. We got to all take cold showers. We have to, stop driving everywhere. I think there are solutions, but the solutions require a sincere look at what it's going to take and building up that infrastructure. And that's what I would have hoped that Biden would have done. Again, he said initially he was going to look at all these other technologies, but I've seen nothing in his administration so far that has really taken an honest look at this stuff and said, my policy is to, reinvigorate our independence from, OPEC and from other companies, from other regimes, and say we're going to be energy, independent.
And we were actually under President Trump. We actually were at the point where we could export oil if we wanted to. We could, we became, an exporter of oil. But then Joe Biden comes in and shuts everything down, and look where we are now.
So I don't know. I guess
for gas.
My point is that if people in the left, I say Democrats, were really sincere about solving the issues, they could. But when they go into power, all they really try to do is they put in the token programs, like again I mentioned about the electric leaf blowers that are mandated now. That sounds good, like okay, now that's such a big problem that we got to switch over to electric, but that's just like this. It's the wrong time, it's the wrong place, and it's putting more of it in a encumbrance on people. So anyway,
so we've actually gotten to final thoughts. We missed some of the more fun stories, like about the sniffles variant that's going around called COVID.
We can talk about that next week.
Yeah, it'll still be here. It'll still be here. So final thoughts. Let's start with you, Jeff. Final thoughts.
Yeah, so I guess I would say that obviously everyone is. It seems Omicron is really, whether it's Omicron or just the COVID in general, it is really just sweeping through with a vengeance. So people that have been doing the right things have been getting COVID. I mean, it's hit our family. It's hit people that I've known close that have been very good about social distancing and other things. So it really just kind of shows that sometimes, despite your best efforts, you can still get it. Now, I have to say that the people that have been vaccinated seems to have had lesser, symptoms, which is good. But again, I'll reiterate that we need to have better infrastructure and support for this. We need to have better testing availability. We need to have better first responders who are able to determine, how to deal and triage COVID cases, and have hospitals that are fully equipped and staffed to deal with these emergencies. Because right now, COVID is as bad, if not worse, as far as a health issue in terms of if you get COVID and get a severe case, God be with you, because it seems like you're not going to find any place that has the staff and the ability to really take you in. So I'm seriously concerned about our capacity to deal with this right now.
Final thoughts to Don before I fall asleep. But they say you yawn more when it's colder too. So
is that what it is? Yeah, just follow up on Jeff's thing, and I got a couple of things here. So yeah, I mean, look, my problem with the whole COVID thing or Omicron thing is just that there seems to be this big rush into this thing. I mean, there's this idea of we've got lines out the doors and around the corners to get a test kit. Like, okay, is everybody in that line? Do they really need to be tested, or is this just being kind of fomented by people's fear that they think they need to get tested? I mean, I think there have been plenty of test kits for people would have been that are actually feeling that they might be sick and they might have symptoms. But I do think that some of these things, it tends to get just roll on one thing another, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, you don't have enough test kits around you to do anything. So even the people who really probably need it to get tested, they can't get tested because the people who aren't sick but they think they're sick, maybe in their head, but they're not feeling any symptoms whatsoever, go out there and they've been scooping all these things up. It's been driving me a little bit nuts, about all this. But the other thing too is just that the RNC has now apparently narrowed for the next convention in 2024. So we've got Milwaukee, Nashville, Salt Lake, Pittsburgh.
I vote for Nashville.
I think I'm just going to say, from a political standpoint, if they use that metric, that I would think that they would look at Pittsburgh and Milwaukee as places to take, the attendees to, and states that they want to bolster their chances because of the importance of Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. But Nashville and Salt Lake would be great cities. But I think
I'm disappointed there isn't a Florida city on here. I was so hoping we'd go do it in Florida.
Yeah, I don't know what the criteria.
Or Texas.
is.
Why don't we go to Texas? We haven't been to Texas for a convention in forever. I mean, Houston.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, my thing is that I'm not part of the powers that be, so I don't know what exactly their line of thinking is in terms of this. But I always used to think that some of it always, have to do in going into a battleground state or going into an area where you want to kind of boost your candidate's chances, in some of those tougher states. It doesn't, Texas, it's not there, but Texas would be a great state to go to, but as well as Florida. But I think the thinking tends to be where they want to show something off and shore up some of their support.
And I think Tennessee is probably the safest state to do a convention in. I'll tell you why. Heaven forbid if there's another Megatron or a Galvatron variant of COVID, and they want to decide. At least I know the governor of Tennessee will not put these lockdowns and have a mandate of no more than 6 people can gather. I think. Well,
by 20 to me, Dwight, by 24, I think whoever. Joe Biden has already hit this realization that the federal government can't fix COVID. Even though he thought he could do this in 2020 when he was running for office, not going to do it. And that the issue really should be up to the states, which is, who said this? Donald Trump said the states should be handling this. So by 2024, I think we'll probably have a much better handle on what's going on here. But it's not going to be because of Joe Biden.
And remember, we are the party. Well, here's this: we're the party of states' rights. Look, it's kind of like if you go back to '94, we looked at what state governors were doing and all the stuff they were doing, and that's because the states are incubators for. Why would you want to have a policy that fails in a state? You test out these policies in states, not the nation, because it's kind of a horrible place to do a test bed. You do a little bit more controlled testing, but it is what it is,
Yep. All right. So those are my thoughts. On to you, Dwight.
Okay. Oh.
If you can stop yawning.
I know. I don't know what it is. I think it's the fact that it's cold and snowy outside. By the way, because of this, Republicans did scuttle another election yesterday.
That's pretty.
Because of it's
I'm going to say, even though that's an inside joke in terms of the whole for the club and everything like this, at first when I saw that, I thought, even though I understood what it was for, there's truth in that. There is real truth in that. That January, because of January 6th. So
there was a snowstorm, and that's why the club. But we're having elections on Monday. We're having fair and open elections on Monday. And but a couple of things for final thoughts I've got. One is that I think I wish it won't happen, but I think we're headed to more school shutdowns because of look at Montgomery County. I believe it was the MoCo show. We're talking about all these high schools that have positive cases over 5% in elementary schools. Oh boy, I guess I need a nap. I don't know what it is.
This is so funny.
But I mean, I think I hate to say it again, like we talked about this last week. It's no longer about. It's a lot about is controlling people, and that's what it's really become. You know, look at Chicago. Honestly, if the mayor there had any sense, she would do what President Reagan did and tell the teachers get back to work Monday or you're fired, like he did with air traffic controls. Frankly, do that, but she can't do that because she is wholly owned by the teachers unions and other big labor, and that's why Democrats can never be serious for things like tort reform, paycheck protection, any of that stuff, because they are wholly owned subsidiaries of the trial lawyers and big labor. But and on a final note is that we today, this is probably our this marks our 100th show since we've been doing it in this format. Opposed to, I mean, we're well over 100 if you count the previous versions of the show we had when we weren't quite controlled, you know. And we thank Bats for that because Bats is the one that initiated the 1 hour strict time limit. So this is our 100th show, everyone. It's been a lot of fun. You know, it's we've been doing this. It's great, and you know we'll have 100 more to come. So with that, Happy New Year's, everyone, again, and good night.
Years.
Good night.